Good morning. Happy Tuesday. Welcome to Rising. We do have a great show planned today. All-star panelists Jennifer Holdsworth-Karp and Rachel Bovard are here for Team Rising.
Author Ryan Girdusky will discuss the eviction moratorium and broader ideas of wealth and populism. And Richard Hanania will draw some interesting parallels between the U.S.'s response to COVID and 9/11. But first, we've been following the special election in Ohio a lot on this show, and today is the day. Polls are open for Ohio's 11th congressional district race between progressive candidate Nina Turner and establishment-backed candidate Shontel Brown.
The primary has attracted the national attention of many political figures, but voter turnout will be the key factor in this race, which easily became the most expensive primary this year. Voters were able to start voting at 6:30 a.m. and will be able to cast ballots until 7:30 p.m.
Friend of the show, Briahna Joy Gray, is on the ground and joins us now. Briahna, you worked with Nina on the Bernie campaign, and you actually have family in Cleveland. I believe you're in your grandmother's house right there.
That's right, Ryan.
Will you tell us what sense are you getting on the ground about the race?
Yeah, well, I was driven to come here out of a kind of a curiosity that just I could not get past, because we know how much money is being poured into this race. Shontel Brown has a number of endorsements, powerful endorsements from corporate Democrats, from Hillary Clinton to our favorite, the man who won the race for Joe Biden in South Carolina, Jim Clyburn. And in fact, some of those endorsers were present when I went to church with both candidates on Sunday. And throughout this race, what we've seen is that the people on the ground are largely torn because of the kind of aggressive, high-energy nature of these commercials and the back and forth between the candidates because of the influence of all of that outside corporate money. And when I spoke to folks on the ground, I heard multiple times that people who maybe had reasons to like both candidates, one woman, was in a prayer group with Shontel Brown's grandmother, but she was a Bernie supporter in the primary, said, you know what, I'm just going to sit this out. And so I think the winner here is going to be the person who motivates folks who are otherwise put off by some of the negativity in the race to go ahead and focus on what their policy priorities are and actually turn out today or in the earlier voting periods over the course of the past week or so.
Now, this race has painted a broader picture of the disconnect between the progressive and more moderate wings of the Democratic Party. Newly released campaign finance disclosures show that Shontel Brown and a major Democratic PAC supporting her campaign have been heavily funded by donors who usually support Republicans. So, Briahna, do you think that the voters on the ground are persuaded by the fact that some Republicans have been dumping money behind Shontel Brown? Is that making any impact?
Certainly that is persuasive to some, but we have to remember that the counter argument is that Senator Turner isn't a, quote, real Democrat because she was critical of Joe Biden at the end of the 2020 primary. So the voters' choices as they're being teed up are between someone who is, quote, not a real Democrat because they are a progressive and someone who is maybe not a real Democrat because they are welcoming money from Republicans. I would point out that when I went to this church service on Sunday, the owner of the Cleveland Browns, who was in 2017 a Trump donor, was in attendance and welcomed warmly by the congregation. He and the pastor have apparently had some heart-to-heart over the course of the George Floyd protest and have developed a relationship. But there does seem to be this interesting mix of kind of corporate conservative backing for Shontel Brown, including from Republicans, and the claim that she's the one that has the better, more significant title to the big D Democrat next to her name.
And Briahna, I want to ask you about the influence of the super PAC, DMFI PAC, which you certainly remember from its effort during the Bernie campaign to knock Bernie out in Iowa and then Nevada before throwing in the towel and passing the baton to Clyburn, who finished him off. They went heavily against Jamal Bowman in his primary against Eliot Engel, but fell well short there. Bowman ended up winning in a landslide. They've gone after other squad members and have always come up short. It feels like this time they don't want to leave anything to chance. Shontel Brown was down by like 30 points when they started pouring money into the race, money that she appeared to effectively have solicited on her campaign website in a dubious ethics violation. They will probably spend more than $2 million on this race by the end of it. What effect is that having on the race? Are you seeing their ads on television, on radio, and is their messaging, which is not at all about what their name is, which is Democratic Majority for Israel? It's all about just playing playing clips of Nina Turner saying mean things about Democrats. Are you seeing it on television, and is it having an influence on the race?
Oh, yes. You cannot miss it. When I arrived here at my grandmother's house on Saturday night, I was met with 5 pieces of mailed material, one from Senator Turner talking about her actual policy objectives, a $15 minimum wage, Medicare for all, etc., and 4 pieces from the Shontel Brown campaign, most of which were negative. I can't recall a single policy priority other than the fact that she constantly avers that she will back Joe Biden, I guess, no matter what he decides to do in office. Value neutral. When you turn on the television, at one point I watched 5 commercials, and 4 out of the 5 were for either Shontel Brown or Senator Turner. Now, I will say that the commercials are pretty evenly split. Shontel obviously has taken advantage of all of this outside money. Senator Turner has the advantage of actually being able to fundraise from a grassroots base of support. And it seems, at least based on the perception of media, that she has been able to hold her own. And one interesting fact that is corroborated by my own observation and also by interviews I've done with people here on the ground is that because Shontel Brown's ads make these claims about Senator Turner not being a real Democrat, and Senator Turner's ads come on with numerous endorsements touted from prominent Democrats, there is the definite perception that Shontel Brown's ads are misleading and dishonest, and I think are turning off some folks who might be potential voters of hers.
You know, it's really interesting when there is this framing, when it comes to these 2 candidates in particular in every single progressive race, which is who's the real Democrat. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering how much voters are even buying into this, because, it's like, how do you even define who is a real Democrat? What is a real Democrat? When you look at a candidate like Nina Turner, when she's asked questions like, what are your policy? What's your priority? And she says poverty is the big one in her district, next to education and opportunities. She wants to build community. She wants there to be a concerted community effort, not just from law enforcement and government, but also on the ground, community churches, to fix injustices and inequalities. Nina Turner really has more of this sort of freedom fighter mentality and outlook, whereas when Shontel Brown is asked the same questions, she really kind of gives that. It's interesting because I feel like she actually gives the answers that many people that are conservatives who say, oh, the progressives, they're radical and they're taking over and they're going to, they're making all this crazy change. I almost feel like Shontel Brown sort of regurgitates the talking points that make them more afraid. She talks about a lot of things that are important, but she highlights them, where she talks about, the pandemic is the big problem and the vaccines, and we've got to get more vaccines out there, even though the district is a bit more vaccine hesitant than other areas. She then talks about, it's all about racism, or it's about Trump is the problem, or climate. And, like I said, all of those things are important, but it's interesting because when you listen to Nina, she's actually talking about working with other people and solutions. And Shontel Brown seems to be talking about the sky is falling a little bit, kind of the Democratic establishment talking points. So, what on the ground, are people, what do they think an actual real Democrat is?
Well, I applaud you for finding some substantive comments from Shontel Brown, because they have been few and far between from my perspective. I think your point about folks on the ground caring about local issues, trash pickup, whether the police are going to come when you call, is spot on. I spoke to one city councilman, Councilman Griffin, at that same church service on Sunday, and he pointed out that he was a Biden delegate, that he was the top vote getter for Biden, that he was someone who was all in for Joe Biden, but also was supportive of Senator Nina Turner because he knows her from the district and he knows that she knows the issues and the priorities of the people who live here. And that a lot of the kind of national high-level conversation just is not germane to what's going on in the district. And that is something that's very true of a lot of people you speak to. Folks here know Senator Turner. She is not the new kid on the block. If anything, Shontel Brown is known for being someone who's been running from a lot of lower positions in the state, trying to get in where she can without a real ideological course or a commitment that seems to extend beyond her own personal ambitions. And that is, I think, part of why some of the narrative that her campaign is trying to push about Senator Turner being an outsider or somehow not committed to the Democratic Party or the values of the state in the city, the district rather, are really falling on deaf ears.
And Briahna, since you're following the race kind of in real life, on the ground, among actual people, I wanted to get your take on kind of a contradiction that this race has exposed. And you have these millions of dollars coming from corporate Democrats and from the Democratic establishment to stop Nina Turner from going to Congress. And if you post something favorable about Nina Turner on Twitter.com, you will have a ton of the K-Hive and corporate establishment types telling you that she's going to destroy the Democratic Party, an enemy of the people, et cetera, et cetera. Below those people, you'll have other people from the left saying that actually this whole thing is useless, and she's just going to be another sellout once she gets to Congress. So both sides can't be right. They people who are spending millions of dollars to try to stop her wouldn't be doing that if they didn't think there was, if they didn't think she represented some threat to what was going on. But on the other hand, there is a sizable online faction that is convinced that that's not true, that she doesn't represent a threat.
Well, certainly you're right to observe the weird stakes that are hashing out on Twitter. I saw this morning that Shontel Brown just got the ringing endorsement of Bill Kristol, which I'm sure concretizes her standing as the #1 Democrat in this race. But look, I think that progressives who are skeptical of potential squad members, and their ability to do all that they can, their willingness to do all that they can to push for progressive issues, are completely legitimate in having that skepticism, and that the history of movements in this country has shown that getting a progressive in office isn't enough, that you have to continue to push and hold their feet to the fire. And I think that it will be incumbent on Senator Turner, as it is on all progressives in office right now, to earn the trust of the people through their actions. And I am hopeful, like many people are, that Senator Turner will be a fighter. Certainly her record demonstrates that she has been one in the past, but also even the best intended person in the kind of coercive situation that is Congress, that is being on the Hill, is inclined to not necessarily always put themselves in the line of fire if they don't know that there's a bigger inferno of the people at their back. And so I think that what you're seeing online is people basically signaling that getting into office isn't enough, and that Senator Turner, if they want their continued support, is going to have to really go to the mat for the people who got her elected.
And feel free to skip this one, but do you have a gut sense of how this election is going to go for people who can't wait until 7:30 until the votes start getting reported?
This is really hard. This is a really good way to come out of this with egg on your face. I'm hopeful. I think that if everyone had a chance to be spoken to and touched, if everyone had someone come to their door and have a conversation, we would definitely see a good result for Senator Turner. I experienced some canvassing on Sunday where we went up to a man, and we covered all of this, by the way, in extensive interviews on today's episode of Bad Faith Podcast. People can tune in, covering the interviews at the church and all of this. But one gentleman had both a Shontel Brown sign and a Nina Turner sign in front of his house. And when you're door knocking, you're not supposed to go up to somebody's house with the sign of your opponent. But I went over there as an independent, journalist and started asking him questions. And he said, well, I haven't met Senator Turner, so I'm for her. My wife is for I'm for Shontel. My wife is for Senator Turner. And I said, well, you haven't met her. She happens to be around the corner. She came over, and within a few minutes of talking, he had flipped, taken the Shontel Brown sign out of his yard and thrown it in the back near his pigeon coop. So that's all to say that I think if she does her job, if all of the volunteers who have come in from out of state and local volunteers knock the doors and touch enough people, then her message is enough to carry her across the finish line.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I think that one of the issues with sort of this progressive versus establishment wings of the Democratic Party is that, you've got people that maybe might be very turned off by somebody like AOC. And they see that, they see her and they say, oh, I don't want that. I don't want that radical to be representative of the Democratic Party. But when you listen to Nina Turner and you actually take the time, she actually wins you over right away with her answers to questions. She's so smart. She has a very, she's sensible. She reminds me a lot of very authentic. And she reminds me of somebody more in the progressive wing who would be more akin to like a Ro Khanna and not as much like an AOC. Somebody who's really willing to work with people on the other side of the aisle. Ro Khanna is known for that, reaching across the aisle and saying, hey, let's get together and work on things we actually agree on. And I think that Nina Turner does give off that essence that she would be the type of person who, when people listen to her, they say, well, that woman makes a lot of sense. Whereas somebody like Shontel Brown, I think, really represents more of that Nancy Pelosi wing of the Democratic Party. And when you listen to her, you're like, okay, I'm getting a lot of platitudes here. I'm getting a lot of platitudes.
Say what you want about it, but no one can coalition build like Senator Turner. And the fact that she has, Gary Chambers out here knocking doors for her and Cornel West, and also on the other side, Bakari Sellers and people like this Biden delegate fighting for her really shows that there's something that I think goes beyond even the core of her platform here, that she's someone who folks from across the aisle see as having a great deal of integrity and that folks have trust in to do the right thing. And you heard that a lot about Bernie Sanders, conservatives saying things like, I might not agree about how he plans to go about doing something, but I think his heart is in the right place and he believes what he's saying. And I think that kind of politician is few and far between, but Senator Turner has that essence.
Well, absolutely.
Briahna Joy Gray, host of the Bad Faith podcast. Check out her episode on this race. Great luck. Best of luck today.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you to the candidates.
We'll be watching.
And we'll tell you what's on our radars up next.